Welcome, everyone, to our first recruiting roundup where we're going through and talking about every college team's recruiting class. And we're starting today with the top team in the state at the moment, the Baylor Bears. We welcome on, as always, Greg Powers from Next Level Athlete. Greg, thanks for being with us, as always.
As always, man, glad to be here and glad to talk a little bit about Baylor's recruiting class in the 2020 cycle. And you touched on a lot of positive momentum going for the Bears right now. They did suffer a setback against Oklahoma, but I don't think that's going to slow Matt Rule and his staff down on the recruiting trail at all.
Yeah, well, and this class is kind of interesting, right? Because Rule has done a pretty good job of recruiting the past couple of years, but you look at this class, it's kind of a weird class because only 13 kids right now this far in the year. It's ranked number 62 nationally, last in the Big 12, but when you look at this class, what are some of your first impressions of it?
Well, first off, I think that they've done a really good job of evaluating guys who play for top teams coming in, and I think that's very important. Evaluating kids in Texas who play for good schools, and one thing that I've noticed that they do a bit more underneath of Matt Rule's guidance is they recruit a bit more nationally. You know, they have a couple guys from Louisiana on that 13-man commitment list this year, so they're not afraid to go outside of the state's borders to find some talents, but they definitely take care of the home state guys first.
Yes, no question. So again, 13 commits right now in the class of 2020, as of today, of course. And so looking at this list, who's your top guy on this list? Somebody that maybe Baylor fans need to know.
Well, Baylor fans have to know the name Tay McWilliams. He's the lone 4-star prospect on the Baylor commitment list, according to the DCTF Hot 100, one of the top-rated prospects in the entire state, and he is that guy who could really abuse Big 12 defenses. You know, he's a grinder over 200 pounds. You're not going to bring him down easily up on first contact. He's able to actually, he has really good feet in the hole. You know, he's able to dance in the hole, make people miss, and then you combine that with his strength and the ability to run through those arm tackles, and I think that you're setting up for something special. The question now remains is how solid is he with his commitment to Baylor now that the Texas Longhorns have recently extended him an offer, but it looks like UT has targeted him on the defensive side of the football, and that could be a pretty big game changer because I think Tay's a guy who needs to be on the offensive side.
Well, you look at his frame. I mean, he's listed on 247 as 6'2", 202. I mean, is he one of those guys who Matt Rule will be able to kind of run through the line, run through the tackles consistently?
I think so, and they really don't have that guy per se on their offense right now. And I think that that's something that they'll be able to lean on because Matt Rule, to me, and his offensive staff there, it wants to use the ground and pound, very much so.
Right.
So I think that he's a guy who could probably come in very early and make a huge impact. And, you know, you got Jahdae Barron, too. That's another guy on the defensive side of the football to keep an eye on. He's probably the second highest rated commitment in this class. From Pflugerville Connolly in the Austin area, you know, right at that 6-foot mark. Very good defensive back class, I think, for Baylor. We you know, before we started talking about them on the air, we were talking about how talented a group of DBs they've really recruited this year because you got Jahdae Barron at Pflugerville Connolly, A.J. McCarty at Brownwood, who could actually probably play on either side of the football. I mean, they started initially contacting him to play wide receiver. Then he got interested in playing defensive back as he dialogued with the coaches. So he could play on either side of the football, but DB may be like his highest upside. If he wants to play in the NFL, that may be the spot. And then, you know, you're going to ask me next about sleepers, so we'll get to that.
Yeah. Well, actually, let me ask one other question first. So when you're Baylor and you have a season like 2019 where the defensive backs just take such a step forward, does that help? I mean, how much do kids look at that, you know, at the 2019 class when you do have a couple of defensive backs who now might play in the NFL?
Well, first off, they do notice that. Recruiting is all about relationships and the ability to see yourself being successful in that program. Those are the two keys, the big keys to success when you're wanting to go in and pitch your program to a prospective student athlete. You want to be able to say, here's the guys who have been successful and why, and here's how we see you fitting in, and then build a relationship behind that. And then you're talking about multiple visits to campus, strong relationship with the position coach, and then that prospect being able to know that the head coach does have a vision for him within his scheme. So if you can put all that stuff together, then you can really start to have a lot of success on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, okay, let's move on to best sleeper. So, again, only 13 kids in this class so far. And again, not a class that's necessarily all rated very highly. So, who are some of those guys that you think are maybe a little overlooked in this recruiting cycle?
Well, the guy who jumps to the top of my list is Theron Stroups from Lancaster. And that's because he plays on a team who has Lorando Johnson playing opposite corner from him. And Lorando's committed to play at LSU. By and large, a lot of people knew about Lando at the beginning of the recruiting process, and some of these other Lancaster guys went under the radar, Stroups being one of those. He passes the eyeball test like nobody else in this class. As a matter of fact, I think he and Seth Jones are probably on the hoof, the guys who are most impressive. And he has that explosive quality to his game. Stroups is a guy who could play corner or safety. It just kind of depends upon his development. He's big, 6'1". He's muscular. He has coverage skills, but he closes on the football, and he's a very physical tackler. So as I look down that list, he's towards the bottom of it when you consider a composite ranking, but I think his upside is very, very high. And it wouldn't be a surprise at all to see a guy like him have a better collegiate career than his more highly rated teammate. And we've seen that time and time again at schools like DeSoto, at schools like Highland Park, Katy. They have a lot of top prospects, but some of these guys slip under the radar who have that chip on their shoulder, and I think that's what you could see with Stroups.
Yeah, well, we talked a little bit about their best position group being defensive back. What do you expect from this group? Do you expect it to be the type who can maybe come in and play right away? Do you expect it to be the type that maybe down the road you really start to see this? What do you think of these players?
That's all according usually to depth. What we don't know a lot about for me is, we've done some research on some of the out-of-state names, on this list. But offensive guard commitment, Mose Jeffrey, Kilgore. I expect him to come in and probably get a look right away. They're going to need to replace some guys up front on that offensive line heading into 2020. So that's a guy who has a really good shot of stepping onto the field. And then you look at guys who can have an immediate impact on special teams as well. So are they a guy who can come in and be a special teams player, not redshirt? The new redshirt rule has opened up a lot of doors, because you can take a look at some of these younger guys in the non-conference slate and then decide what type of impact they're going to have on your team. Do I need to play them in the conference schedule, or is this it for these guys? And I think that presents some unique opportunities. But guys who you keep an eye on to make an early impact are running backs and wide receivers, obviously, because you can get more of them involved within the offense. Where it's tougher to have a big impact is offensive line and defensive line traditionally. Those guys are more suited to benefit from a redshirt year and add some mass and muscle in the strength and conditioning program. But if you're an elite pass rusher, watch out, because those guys are hard to find. And if you can get one of them, they have a chance to really come in and make an early impact. And another one of these sleeper types is Anthony Onyenwo from Saxe High School. So he is that edge rushing type. And Saxe, by their standards, kind of had a bit of a down year this year. Played in a lot of tight games. The spotlight just wasn't on them like it normally is. So he's flying a bit under the radar as far as that is concerned, and he may be one to watch. If he can develop and be that guy, edge rushing specialist, then maybe he's a guy to keep a close eye on.
Well, you look at, we mentioned the recruiting rankings. They're number 62 in the 247 composite. They're last in the Big 12. Even their average rating is down from the last couple of years, and we've seen this staff have success. Obviously, those first 2 years with those big recruiting classes. Is this, to you, something to be concerned about? Why is it exactly that Baylor is kind of recruiting behind everybody else right now?
I wouldn't look at it in that regard. Okay, so here's how I look at it. You come into a recruiting cycle and you have needs to address at certain positions. We kind of know where those needs are with Baylor. They need to refurbish what's going to be a depleted secondary. Check mark. They've done that. They've got 5 or 6 guys coming in that can compete on that side of the ball. They need to add depth along the offensive front and guys who could potentially come in and play right away. I think you can give a check mark there, because they got Mose Jeffrey, a guy at the junior college ranks who can come in, and they've got a guy who they really like in Gavin Byers from Colleyville Heritage. He may not be a day one starter, day one contributor, but he has that frame to build up on to be a guy down the road that you could probably depend on to be a tackle. a tackle prospect, and I think that's important as well. So if you can address your needs, I think that's most important. This was probably, as you can attest, always going to be a smaller signing class. And those recruiting rankings numbers that everybody looks at and gets caught up on are always based around a 25-man class. Baylor's not going to sign 25 guys in this class, so they're going to be a little bit behind the rankings curve as far as that is concerned. If you're going to look at this class and say, well, Baylor's not rated within the top 25 nationally, and you're going to use that as your parameter for success, you're probably not going to be happy with this class as a fan. So to give some perspective and spin on that is they're going to go underneath that 25-man limit, and they're going to address their needs. That's really all that you can do. Plus, find guys who can fit into your scheme. That's very important. If you recruit a bunch of talented guys who don't fit in on your offense or defense, they're going to be transferring soon anyway.
Yeah. Well, looking at the landscape of recruiting right now, obviously Baylor only has 13 commits in this class. One thing that we had talked about is that they could potentially be a beneficiary of Chad Morris getting fired at Arkansas and potentially some of those guys becoming available. Are there any guys to you that immediately come to mind that could help fill out that class?
Well, it's very interesting because Chad Morris's firing, I think, at Arkansas is going to open up some doors potentially for Baylor. They offered, by and large, I think that Arkansas had 7 decommitments from Texas high school football in the wake of that firing, and I think they've offered maybe all of them. I would have to research on Chandler Morris, Chad Morris's son, the quarterback at Highland Park. I'm not 100% sure if he had a Baylor offer or not, but they offered Brandon Frazier, Alan Horace at tight end. They've offered Savion Williams, big wide receiver who plays quarterback at Marshall. They've offered Kelvonte Dixon, who's a name who's starting to resurface from Carthage, who's kind of like a Mr. Do-It-All in the Carthage offense, would probably remind some people of a little bit of Jamichael Hasty, who played high school football at Longview within a Baylor offense, if they were able to land him. And there were just a number of guys like that to keep an eye on that slid off of that commitment list. Another guy who I really want to watch when it comes to Baylor recruiting, and somebody who could be like that marquee name to kind of hang on the wall, is Princely Umanmielian. Recent decommitment from Texas. It would be... Maynard's not that far away from Waco. Can they get back in on him? And that's the type of signing that could really make waves for Matt Rule and his staff. If they're able to flip a guy from Texas who's also considering Texas A&M. And you talked about something very important right off of the jump. Baylor's the number 1 school in Texas right now in college football. They need to be able to compete with the other top schools in Texas for recruits, and they need to be able to use that right now. Can they do it with Princely?
Yeah, and just over your years covering recruiting, I mean, you mentioned Baylor goes from 1-11 to 7-6, and now they're almost certainly going to win at least 10 games this year. Is there a point where you feel like you really start to see that bump impact recruiting when you kind of get to that level of success?
Baylor's had success in recruiting. There's no doubt about it. Back in the Art Briles days at Baylor, when it was crescendoing, they were beating Texas and OU consistently on the field. Then they were taking those wins and turning that right back around and using it in recruits' living rooms. And that's the same thing that they need to do this year. They need to have some marquee wins, and they have had. They lost a thriller to OU. It was a very close game. Some people would say that it wasn't like the most exciting game. But heading into the season, no one was predicting Baylor was going to be talked about to be in the college football playoff. Really, I don't think too many people put them in the Big 12 championship hunt, and they're right there in it. They're going to probably, with another big win this season, be right in that mix to play in the Big 12 championship game and have a potential rematch with OU. So that's something to really watch out for. Can they start to turn that around? That's the key to success. If you want to recruit against Oklahoma and Texas A&M, then you need to be competitive on the field with them first and foremost. Where Baylor was 3 years ago as a program recruiting to where they are now is night and day.
Yeah.
Night and day. Matt Rule's done a tremendous job, and he's done that thwarting the NFL rumors. He's done that basically rebuilding a program. So now they're in on recruits, big-time recruits like Tay McWilliams, like Jahdae Barron, who was a one-time TCU commit, who's probably Baylor's biggest rival. They were able to get him to flip. So they're out there competing for these guys, and now they just need to keep the momentum.
1 month left until the early signing day, 3 months left until National Signing Day. We'll be there the entire time to keep track for you. Greg Powers, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely.